What forms of knowledge are crucial to being good at TFT? The two categories that come to my mind are patch knowledge and fundamentals. Everyone talks about TFT fundamentals, but patch knowledge is the easy part. You just go to any tier list, memorize it, and you pretty much have 75% of that category taken care of. If you want a deeper dive, go to a data site and memorize that as well. Anyone can do this rote memorization, but knowing how to apply patch knowledge and combine it with fundamentals of TFT is much more difficult because learning the fundamentals of TFT is a bit trickier. It takes both knowledge and practice. If we look at the history of TFT, TFT has gotten more and more complex every single set, and the fundamentals that you need to know get broader and deeper knowledge is needed. The basics just aren't enough anymore. I do have to say though, we're gonna cover a lot of topics in this video, and unfortunately, you do need to know all of them in order to combine them all together. Knowing just one or two of these is not quite enough. But luckily, in this video, we're gonna cover all those topics, go in depth in each and every one of them, which will allow you to climb and improve at TFT. Let's start with line selection. In case you have not heard of line selection before, this essentially is just creating the structure for the rest of your game of what you're trying to play. You're essentially deciding which line to go down or which road to go down, which will then dictate the rest of your play. Line selection is one of the most important fundamentals to understand in modern TFT because the game has shifted away from strong standalone units like in earlier sets that lacked a lot of structure, such as sets 1 through 6. It's now more geared towards defined comps and augments that the developers balance around. This is why we have more things like vertical comps, as opposed to random 4 and 5 cost soups that we've had in the past. Of course, this is speaking in generalizations. There are still some comps that can play around standalone strong units, but generally, those units are overpowered and the game is much more balanced around trait breakpoints compared to the past. This brings us to stage 2-1, where we have the augment phase, and this is the most popular spot to select your preferred line or game plan from there on out. This means at times we will know what we are playing for the rest of the game from 2-1, and some games you won't. Right now in TFT, there are 5 different types of augments. We have econ, item, combat, trait, and hero augments. Each of these augments have their own set of pros and cons. Econ augments grant you access to a lot of money that opens up a lot of possibilities, but it doesn't offer any sort of direction in a lot of cases. With econ augments, most of the time direction will come from what items you have, and you'll likely default into some sort of fast 8 line as you will be rich enough to hit your core 4 cost units on stage 4 too. If you got a reroll econ augment, your items will dictate which comp you're going to go, and you'll have to decide whether you want to reroll for 1, 2, or 3 costs. If you get a really big econ augment, or if there's just a lot of econ in the game from a portal or just from gold drops in general, this excess money sometimes allows for fast 9ing, which is a whole nother topic, but this usually involves a high risk, high reward gameplay, and often requires a second econ augment or maybe extra gold from a portal or maybe just gold drops in general, unless you hit some really disgusting econ combo. Meanwhile, for reroll, when you reroll when using an econ augment, it can be a bit awkward if you don't get one of those direct reroll augments such as Trade Sector or Prismatic Ticket, so using just a regular old econ augment can be a little bit awkward at times unless the rest of the conditions are met naturally, such as naturaling the unit or having best in slot items dropped. Generally speaking, there are easier and higher capping ways to use your gold from an econ augment rather than rerolling, so doing something like a fast 8 or transitioning to legendaries usually is preferable if you get a plain gold augment such as Raining Gold. When you do click an econ augment, you generally are going to be a bit weaker than your opponents early on, and naturally that causes you to lose streak. What you need to do in these situations is to prioritize making econ intervals and only hold pairs that will make you strong into stage 3. Marginal upgrades are usually not worth losing your econ advantage, and your goal should just be to push your econ and be very strong on stage 4. So to sum up, econ augments, they're weak in stage 2 and 3, but you should spike very hard in stage 4 and win most of those rounds. Direction will be decided by your item drops more than anything. The benefits of using one of these augments is that you are more likely to hit your desired team composition, but the cons are you will likely be weaker in the early game and late game, so if you don't manage to convert your econ into a strong board, well, you're pretty much just out of luck. I will say that situation is rare if you execute properly, and I would say that on average, taking an econ augment is a low risk, low reward play or a consistent play. Now let's talk about item augments. Items can provide a great amount of direction as they let you play for best in slots or allow you to play comps that have multiple carries. Examples of item augments include Bury Treasures, which gives components, Portable Forge, which gives an artifact item, and High Voltage, which gives an enhanced specific item. Generally speaking, when you click an item augment, you should know immediately what to angle. Artifact items offer a great deal of direction, and I recommend going to a data site and looking up which artifacts are the best from your artifact choices. I like to use teamfight.lol for this. Next, we have meta knowledge. Meta knowledge is pretty important for picking the correct artifacts. Combine this with your patch knowledge or meta knowledge is pretty important because sometimes you already know which artifacts are going to be strong based on whether the meta champions can use them or not. It's very patch dependent, so you have to check pretty often. When you use an item augment, you're essentially just up items compared to everyone else in the early game, and if you have upgraded units, you are very likely to win streak because of this. Items get multiplicatively stronger, so having a 2-item tank or 2-item carry will give you an advantage compared to just having one. Reroll comps are especially boosted or enhanced by artifact and radiant items. Oftentimes on my tier list, I say stuff like, oh, this comp is A tier, but with this artifact item, they become S or S plus tier. This happens all the time, every single set. The reason why this works is because reroll comps are more focused around one unit, so when you put an artifact or a radiant or any sort of quote-unquote enhanced item on them, you just get a much bigger effect compared to a fast 8 comp where you have maybe 3 units that you care about. So you'd rather get more items to spread the love from something like Buried Treasures rather than a focus item like Portable Forge. But back to reroll comps, this means that taking Portable Forge or anything that gives you an artifact item can give you a ton of direction. One specific example is during set 15 PBE, where artifact items on Darius are completely bonkers. Pretty much any of the melee carry artifacts turn Darius and other units into the next level, and they pretty much just solo everything after a certain point. Just to sum up, having more items than your opponents on units in the early game makes it much more likely that you'll win streak, so you can use these item augments to play with a lead. Even if you do not streak, you'll still have a great deal of direction because you'll have items crafted early, so it'll make it much easier to select a winning line. For example, if you built a lot of attack damage items, obviously you should look for some attack damage geared carry in the later parts of the game. The benefits of taking an item augment is you get a lot of direction and early game strength, and the cons are sometimes item augments get outscaled in the late game by combat augments, or if you end up doing a win-lose in the early game. When that happens, you get hurt a lot on your econ, and you'll struggle and get outscaled by the people who didn't. Now let's go into combat augments. Combat augments tend to scale with game length and will provide more value when you have more units. The reason behind this is because if you have a buff and you have more units, well, you just apply the buff a little bit more, and then you get more value out of it from that. But these buffs can provide a lot of early game strength, but they really shine once you have your desired composition online. Combat augments are much more geared for the later parts of the game in most cases. Meta and patch knowledge is essential for these because some are just much stronger than the others depending on the patch and the current numbers on them. At the end of the day, TFT is a game of numbers, and sometimes it doesn't matter if attack speed is your most important stat if the only combat augment that gives attack speed gives you 1% attack speed, while a different combat augment gives you 1,000 attack damage. Obviously, the 1,000 attack damage is better than the 1% attack speed, even if you like attack speed more on your character. But this is just another example of how you combine patch knowledge with TFT fundamentals. Generally speaking, clicking on a combat augment allows you to empower your board in the most direct way possible because you pretty much always have this buff online and there aren't really too many weird conditions to meet for it. With all that being said though, combat augments are generally a bit worse on stage 2-1 because if you've been paying attention, you know that combat augments get better with the more units you play, and when you only play 4 or 5 units, sometimes 3, your combat augments just are not buffing that many units up, making their value a bit reduced. Also, in the early game, econing and win streaking is much more important, and getting an item gives your board much more immediate power, so you pretty much lose the fights to the people with item augments and then get out econ by all the people with econ augments. It's pretty much the worst part of the middle ground there. The only time I recommend taking a combat augment on stage 2 is when there's some augment in the meta that's just way too powerful to pass up, or if you pretty much just have no better options because Mortdog did not bless you that game. So too long didn't watch. First thing I'd tell you is you better just watch the whole section again, but for the people who want a quick summary, combat augments are usable in general, and they are the most direct way to empower your board with pretty much no conditions, but clicking on them on stage 2 is less valuable than an econ or item augment, but they still can be playable. So the pros of combat augments are that they will always power your board, they're good for the late game, and the cons is that they do not accelerate or amplify any other part of your game plan. Now let's move on into trait augments. These are some of my favorites, although they have been changed a bit in recent sets. Trait augment's strength is mainly dependent on what's in the meta, so this is pretty much just a knowledge check. If certain verticals are strong, they can be insta-clicks. If not, they're insta rerolls. So what these augments do is that they provide instant direction for you, and you are locked into playing that comp as soon as you click the augment. You pretty much have to play that trait for the rest of the game, if not, you're just wasting a whole augment. This can be both good and bad because for some players, they really like having direction and don't want to get confused from the get-go, and for other players, maybe they could have pivoted into something else and maybe had more flexible options. Some of the strongest things that have come from these augments though is allowing units to access stats or buffs that they normally wouldn't be able to. For example, when you only have 4 units out in the early game, sometimes it's hard to get that 4th unit of a certain trait, let's say it's Sorcerer, because they have Kennen and Lucian as 1 cost, Lux as a 2 cost, and then Ahri and Swain as a 3 cost. It's pretty easy to get a 1 and 2 cost, but getting to 4 Sorcerer by finding an Ahri or Swain can be very tricky. That's why having a trait augment such as a Sorcerer emblem allows you to just play 4 Sorcerer and access that trait breakpoint much earlier. There are other trait augments which give some sort of bonus without giving you an extra emblem, but they pretty much work in the same way because you always have to be playing that trait to get the most out of that augment. A big mistake I see that's made all the time, especially by beginner players with trait augments, is clicking a trait augment with 0 of the units. So you used to be able to kind of get away with this in the past because clicking a trait augment would often give you a unit of that trait. However, nowadays they don't quite do that as much. For example, all the crests do not give any units, and for the crowns they really only give 1 of them, and they're generally low value. So even if a comp is the best comp in the game, if you get a trait emblem for it, you can't quite just hard force it with 0 units because it's going to make your early game incredibly difficult to play. You're pretty much at the mercy of the shops that Mortdog's giving you that day because absolutely nothing in the world is going to work with your augment except for those specific trait units. This week early game is gonna transition you into a weak mid game, and you pretty much have to get lucky sometime between now and stage 4 before you can hopefully catch up to everyone else. So unless you have a team already set up, do not take a trait emblem because there's probably better things to pick. But if you do have an upgraded unit for a vertical comp and are offered that trait emblem or special trait augment, you can simply click it, and more often than not, you'll win streak even harder than the people with item augments. The one issue with trait augments though is that you are locked in very early with very little room to maneuver. So even if a comp is strong, even if you clicked it first, someone else could also click a very similar augment and choose to contest your comp anyways, and that will heavily impact your placements. So there is a risk in doing this even if you have a good start for it. Scouting is very important during the augment round. All you have to do is close the little augment button on the bottom and then press Q or R or click around your screen to go to other people's boards to see what type of augments they picked already, and make sure no one else took your specific trait augment or something very similar. For example, someone can get your exact trait from Wandering Trainers and they're probably going to use it anyways. So in summary, don't click trait augments if you have 0 of the units in your opener unless the trait is absolutely broken OP and you know there's a way to get back to it, and you also need to scout for people contesting you. The benefits of trait augments is that you have instant direction with a very high cap potential depending on which one you got, and you're able to access trait breakpoints much earlier than you normally would. The cons of it is that you are immediately locked into that line of play, and pretty much you're at the mercy of your shops and whether people decide to contest you or not. Lastly, we have hero augments. So hero augments include things like Burning Bright and Knuckle Dusters, which essentially transform a unit into a different version of themselves, and oftentimes it's a tank unit becoming a damage dealer. For example, Knuckle Dusters gives you a Vi, and your strongest Vi becomes an attack fighter, and she now deals heavy single target damage and gains attack damage for item components equipped on your team, much different from the regular Vi that we normally play. These augments are the hardest to quantify the strength of and will vary in strength heavily depending on the patch. So I know I said a lot about in the fundamental section that the knowledge is pretty important regardless of the patch, but for hero augments in particular, that rule is thrown out the window. You pretty much just need to know what's good and what's not. If a hero augment is broken, you just click it and you win. If they're horrible, you click it and you pray for a fifth. There are, of course, times and places to play each and every one of them, but essentially you can follow a rule very similarly to the last type of augments, which were trait augments. If you have a bunch of copies of your hero augment with the slammable item, then that augment is clickable. If not, you're better off picking something else. But again, it really does depend on the patch. The best way to figure out which hero augments are going to be good or bad is to just do some simple data checking. So you go to stats, explore, and then pick whichever rank you want. Let's go ahead and do Emerald Plus right now. And then you go to any of the heroes with hero augments. For example, let's talk about Vi. So Vi has a hero augment which allows her to do a lot of punching and gets a lot of loot. But since they removed augment stats a couple of sets ago, the best way to figure this out is by putting in Vi, making her 3-star, and then check out the item she's holding. If it's going to be Infinity Edge instead of something like a Warmogs, you know that the Infinity Edge games are going to be the ones where she has her hero augment, because absolutely no one is building Infinity Edge Vi as a 3-star if they do not have it. So we could see 3.8, 4.02, 3.99, it's going to be a very good augment in that case for a 2 cost. You could do the same exact stuff with Malphite. Malphite, he really likes those AP items, so if you set him as a 3-star, you have to be careful because he does play 3-star in crew a ton, but if you scroll down a bit, when he has Stoneplate, Warmogs, he's averaging a 4.0 around there, but if you have his hero augment, which is Tectonic Titan, he's going to be building Jeweled Gauntlet, and there he's got a 4.63, so you know in those cases, maybe not the best option to go for. But again, you could do this for any of these hero augments, just based on looking at their items and looking at their star level, just to gauge how good the comps are. Normally for 1-cost comps, if they're anything below a 4.3, it's generally pretty playable. For 2-cost reroll, you want to be at least a 4.0. And then for 3-cost, around like 3.5 is preferred, but if it's below 3.75, then it is doable, just not ideal, because obviously the games where you hit the 3-star, you already got pretty lucky. The good news about these augments is that they provide a lot of direction because you're pretty much just forced into one of those comps involving that hero and buffing them up as much as possible, and you know who your carry is for the rest of the game and what traits you'll play around. So to summarize, pick this augment if you have a lot of copies of that unit already and an item that is usable on them, but you still need to also check out how good they are on the patch beforehand. Luckily, I provide this on bunnymuffins.lol/meta down in the special section, but if you want to develop your own list, I highly recommend going to teamfight.lol and looking up their stats. The benefits of picking hero augments is that you get instant direction for both who your carry is and what traits you're running, and if that particular augment is OP, you pretty much just automatically get at least a top 3. The weaknesses of hero augments is that you are instantly committed to a comp, and you're at the mercy of hitting and of people griefing you. So just to sum up everything we've learned so far about augments, early game, if you want a win streak, item augments are probably the best at it as they amplify the power of your upgraded units, and you also have extra item slots in the early game pretty much in every situation. If you're weak in the early game and have no upgrades, then you generally want an econ augment as they help you snowball your economy and then you equalize later on in the game. And then for combat augments, these are okay to click, but we do prefer the other ones, but sometimes you don't have any other options. Trait augments are only good if your opener matches the emblem or if the vertical is extremely overpowered. And lastly, hero augments depend on if you have slammable items, if the hero augment is good, and if you have a bunch of copies of that particular unit. So how can we use this information and put it all together? Well, your line selection should be based around what the strongest thing you can do during stage 2. This doesn't always mean board strength. Sometimes the strongest thing and the best thing you can do for your game is to build up an economy lead. Efficiency in stage 2 is very important when selecting a line, and in teamfight tactics, all of your actions should lead each other in the most seamless way possible. By picking a line that is synergistic with your opener, you make the game a lot easier to play, and honestly, sometimes everything else just falls into place. It's essentially the foundation of your game, and you need a strong one if you plan to place decently. Obviously, augments are super duper important, but we can't forget about items and units in our openers for line selection. So your top priority when choosing what item to slam is going to be dependent on what units show up in your shop. You also have to judge whether your opener is strong or weak. I don't mean that in a good or bad sense, I mean it in a board strength sense. Making items for the sake of making items on a weak board removes the ability for you to make better decisions later on. For general rules, I do not recommend making items when you do not have upgrades, as the value of the item is directly related to the base stats of your unit, and 1-star units just don't have the same kind of punch as a 2-star unit. If your opener is weak, it's generally more efficient to take a loss streak and make money without having to make subpar items on subpar units in an attempt to force a win streak. When we make an item, we commit to a certain direction, either AP or AD. Making an Infinity Edge when we have something like Syndra and Rel as an opener doesn't really make any sense, as the attack damage from Infinity Edge is wasted. However, if you have Gnar 2 and a Mundo, slamming an Infinity Edge is going to be amazing for Gnar. The most flexible items you can make in the early game will pretty much always be tank items, and they also tend to be the strongest, as damage in stage 2 is pretty low, so resistances get more value, and flat health gets more value. The only stronger items you can make outside of a tank item are scaling items. I mean scaling within the fight. So Rageblade is an amazing early game item slam that will likely win you a ton of fights, especially if you have a 2-star frontliner to complement a 2-star backliner. As long as your Rageblade holder can live long enough to get a ton of stacks, you are probably going to win the fight. Archangel is another scaling item, but it generally isn't the best in the early game compared to Rageblade because Archangel is often dependent on a different item that gives mana. So Rageblade can be used in any situation as a 1-item combo in itself, but Archangel needs to be comboed with something else like a blue buff. So if you have Archangel plus blue buff or Archangel plus Shojin, maybe you add item anvil start to make those items, then it's going to be really good. But in general, if you just have 3 item components to start off the game, I don't quite recommend making Archangel unless you have a very good reason to do so, or if it's the only acceptable item you can make. Now, let's tie all this in with line selection. If you take a trait augment such as Battle Academia Crown, making a tank item that consumes a tier or a rod such as Spear Visage or Crown Guard is going to be a mistake because it interferes with your game plan of making a 3-item Yuumi carry in the mid game. The items you make need to tie into your game plan at every point of the game, or else you'll find yourself in awkward situations where the items are a bit inefficient on your mid to late game carries. So in this specific scenario, we'd rather save that tier and rod to build items specifically for Yuumi, which are going to be AP caster items, so tiers and rods are the bread and butter for those items. This becomes even more crucial when you consider a reroll comp, as best in slots tend to be more important on reroll comps compared to 4 and 5 cost comps. For example, trying to play Darius, who is a reset champion, without Infinity Edge is a big mistake, as he absolutely needs a spell crit to successfully start off his casting chain and reset after every kill. We'll talk more about this in the item economy section. Speaking of the economy, managing it in TFT is essentially just like any other resource management you have in any other game, but it is a fundamental skill of being good at TFT. In teamfight tactics, we have 2 economies that we need to pay attention to: item economy and gold economy. Let's start off with gold. How we handle our gold economy is directly linked to how our early game streaks look like. Utilizing what we discuss in the line selection part of this guide, we should be able to infer what our streaks will be like in the early game. One of the most important decision points for your economy is immediately on 2-1. If you have any round to spend a lot of mental energy into, it's going to be stage 2-1 because there's augments, line selection, economy decisions, pretty much everything you need to know, like initial item slams. Everything is dependent on this. So if you do this correctly, the rest of your game is going to be so easy. But the big economy choice on stage 2-1 is whether to level or not. But the biggest economy decision on stage 2-1 is to level or not to level. That's really the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings of no econ, or to take arms and level up to try to win streak in stage 2. At this point in the game, you are going to be level 3 and 2 out of 6 XP. So it may seem like spending 4 gold to get an extra unit into the game and better shop odds is not a bad deal, but turns out it is, because 4 gold in the early game is an incredibly big investment to make, given that you only make 5 gold a turn without factoring in interest. And essentially, just like in real life, when you're young, you don't have as much money as when you're old. So knowing whether to level up or save 4 gold on 2-1, if you made this decision perfectly every time, it really could be the difference between being a master or an emerald player. But when you do level up, you do get access to an extra unit, so before you level up, make sure you can actually afford to buy an extra unit to put in. There have been some games, I'm guilty of this too, where I level up because I have a bunch of upgrades and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna go win streak. And then I realize I bought on my upgrades, but I only have 3 units in and I can't afford anything else to put in, so my level up was a complete waste of gold. It happens to the best of us, but it's just something to pay attention to. So in reality, this 4 gold investment is usually at least a 5 gold investment without even counting the lost interest you're gonna lose in future turns. But since the passive gold generation is 5 gold per turn, we essentially lose 1 whole turn of gold generation. It might not seem like that much, but losing interest early really could snowball into losing a lot more money later in the game. Leveling to 4 on 2-1 without upgrades is almost always a mistake. With that in mind, I think one common beginner mistake is leveling too often on stage 2-1. People are doing it without upgrades, without the proper items even if they do have upgrades, and doing this can really impact your ability to make econ intervals on the rest of stage 2 and even into stage 3. If you don't believe me, calculate it yourself. The next game you play and you level up to level 4, let me know what stage you hit 50 gold at, and then compare it to a different game where you don't do it. The difference will shock you. If you're sitting on a lot of pairs on 2-1, you also lose out on level 3 shop odds, which are 75% as opposed to 55% on level 4. Remember how I said before one of the benefits of leveling up to level 4 was better shop odds? Well, sometimes it can hurt you, and again, that's if you do not have upgrades. While this might not seem like a lot, it often is a difference between finding a 2-star 1 cost or not, which can stabilize your later parts of stage 2 and early parts of stage 3. There's so many games where I'm playing and I'm leveling up, but I am still looking for one other 1 cost unit, and I pretty much never hit it for the rest of the game. This has happened before, even though it is rare. But as a general rule of thumb, for building a strong economy, I always recommend to at least try to make 10 gold on stage 2-3, which is the round right before carousel. This allows you to either make 20 gold on 2-5 if you're not leveling up to level 5, or 20 gold on 2-6 if you do level up. Doing this is pivotal in building a strong economy. If you make 20 on 2-6 without factoring a win streak, you'll be at around 27 gold after that round, which is a neutral round. Some people call this Krugs, but they kind of changed what it looks like in recent years. But at the end of stage 2 on the neutral round, more often than not, you're going to get dropped at least 3 gold, giving you 30 gold. This is why making 20 on 2-6 is so important, because it'll get you to 30 that much easier. If Krugs happens to drop you 5 or more, you'll get to 32. And 32 is another important benchmark, because what do we want to do after that? We want to get to 40 gold, and 32 allows you to get there because you get 5 passive gold and then you get 3 interest gold from being at 30 gold. And that allows you to get to 40 on the following round. That's how important these econ intervals are, and I think a lot of people miss this. If you want to know the minimum to make it to the next threshold without counting win streaks and lose streaks, it's going to be 14 to get to 20, 23 to get to 30, 32 to get to 40, and 41 to get to 50. Obviously, it doesn't always work out this way, and having a little extra always helps, because you are going to win some rounds to get extra gold, you are going to streak a little bit to get extra gold, and sometimes you need to buy units, so you might lose some gold as well. But these are just general guidelines to follow, just so you know how to make the next interest threshold. With all that in mind, money in TFT is a very flexible resource, and you shouldn't be afraid to spend it for meaningful spikes. Think about the guy you know that never spends any money, never takes any vacations, and then he just suddenly dies at 32. He saved up all his money and never spent it, and never really got to enjoy it. That's something you should try to avoid, but obviously you shouldn't empty your bank account just because you saw something shiny. If you're sitting on a lot of pairs and are at a stage like 3-1, 3-2, 3-5, or 4-1, those are times where you can consider rolling. But when you do, try to stay at one of the intervals listed above, whether you're trying to make a race to 50 or whether you're just trying to make the next breakpoint. So let's say you leveled up to level 6 and you're 40 gold on stage 3-2, and you have a lot of pairs. How far down should you roll? Well, you could either go down to 34 if you're racing to 51, or you could go all the way down to 32 if you're just trying to get to 40. Both those intervals are going to be the optimal breakpoints. So again, do not be afraid to roll once or twice if it's going to save you health, which is another resource in TFT. Now I want to talk about the guy who optimizes his life and never misses a chance to get a little extra penny. So to those people, sitting above 50 gold may feel good, and I know a lot of people who do it as many times as they can, but it could lead to taking a lot of excess damage, especially on stage 4. So you have to kind of identify how strong your board is and integrate it with your economy. Sometimes it's not good to sit above 50, even though you're going to get extra gold, because if you take 20 life points per turn, you're not going to be there for much longer. So unless you have a very good reason to get every ounce of gold you can get, don't be afraid to go down to 40 or even 30 gold, even if you're kind of during that chill point. So what is a good payoff? Well, maybe if you're trying to go for a fast 9, you really do need to save every penny you can get. That way, once you hit level 9, your board is going to be so strong that you do not lose a single round after that. However, if that's not the case, or if you don't have a setup for Fast 9 based on your augments, items, comp, or whatever, don't be afraid to dig for your core units and upgrades, and many times a loss on stage 4 can be so impactful that it directly affects your ability to top 4. Oftentimes, I already know if I'm top 4ing or not during stage 4, so you really do need to put a lot of importance into this stage. On the flip side, being strong on stage 4 because you rolled a lot of your gold gives you an opportunity to really hit those people who are greeting really hard. That way, they don't have time to cap out their level 9 boards. You either knock them out before they even get there, or you put them on 1 life so that the one lucky person in the lobby knocks them out once they face them. But essentially, taking 1 extra loss on stage 4 because you decided to go level 8 on stage 4-3 instead of 4-2 to do your roll down can literally be the difference between a 6 and a 4th. Don't be afraid to spend your gold to save HP. Now let's talk about item economy. Item economy is one of those newer terms that gets thrown around a lot in TFT. It's always been a thing, but the term definitely has gotten a lot more popular in the past maybe 4 or 5 sets. I think we just called it item management, or like knowing how to build which items before. Like it was something much simpler. But it essentially just means how well you're managing your item components. It's both a simple and complex task at the same time, because there's a difficult balance. We want to build best in slot items, but we also want to build for power now. And unless you have the augment Pandora's items, you're not going to get best in slots every time a random component drops. There's also another thing you need to factor in, which is balancing out frontline and backline and utility items. And while this all sounds very easy to do, we all know we need an even shroud for an attack damage comp, we all know we need a Sunfire Cape, Morello, or red buff, and we all know we need 3 best in slot tank and damage items. Like, we already know this, right? So why isn't everyone challenger? Well, the reason why is because executing this can be extremely difficult. Balancing making core best in slot items on units that are both good in the now and the later, and not messing up the balance between frontline and backline while still saving room for utility items can be extremely complicated. The simplest way to begin thinking about item economy is by classifying items by roles. Certain units need certain roles fulfilled to find their success. One of the most obvious example is with spellcasters or magic damage dealers. Casters for the most part need at least 1 mana item to find success along with 2 damage ones. So let's say, for example, we're at stage 3-1. We slam Spirit Visage on stage 2-1 on a Zac 2-star, and now we're on a 3 streak. We got dropped a Malzahar from an orb, and let's just say using this Malzahar is our best board. We have a Chain, Rod, Tier, and Cloak after the neutral round, and we have to ask ourselves, what are we gonna make? I'll give you some time to think about this a little bit. Pause if you have to. So one popular answer might be to make Gargoyle Stoneplate here with the Chain and the Cloak. This is a pretty strong item because it's just a very solid tank item and it works well with your Zac already. You can also save your tier for a blue buff later on, which is often a best in slot mana item for a lot of different casters. However, I'm going to counter that and say that maybe your strongest board might actually be making an Adaptive Helm and a Crown Guard. It immediately fills the role you were missing on your Malzahar, which was a mana regeneration item, and it gives you a second tank item for your Zac. Making 2 items might allow you to actually win streak throughout all of stage 3. Now, I'm not saying you always do this, because there are different metas and there are different comps which require different items, but more often than not, making 2 usable items is going to be a lot better for your current board, which gives you more XP, which allows you to hit level 8 or level 9, whichever one you're going for, which is going to allow you to hit your team comp easier, and when you eventually bleed out, you'll have a bit more extra life to play with. So this one simple difference between 2 mediocre items or 1 great item can have a huge impact on your game. Of course, if you're lose streaking, maybe you do make the gargoyles and save the tier for a blue buff. But if you're trying to win streak, and in this situation we were on a 3-game win streak, you have to try your best to make 2 items. If you have other answers, let me know down in the comments down below. So essentially what I'm trying to say is both item options work, it just depends on your overall game plan. If you're on a loss streak, maybe you want to greed for an item. But if you're trying to keep your streak, definitely build 2. Item economy is intrinsically tied to board strength, so at many times, if board strength is a greater priority than best in slot items, you need to make those suboptimal items that fulfill the similar roles. An important takeaway is understanding tempo and when we need our items based on our game plan. Your streak or potential to win streak will be a determining factor in whether you should make suboptimal items or not. You should not make items that do not fill a defined role in your current and eventual final composition. Another important perspective to take into account when making items is what components you will be left with. Let's say you already made 3 backline or damage items and anti-heal is already made, and you're sitting on a rod, chain, and a cloak. Many players would default into making Gargoyle Stoneplate here as it is a very strong tank item and one of the most built, but I would argue maybe making a crown guard and keeping your cloak open for a potential different tank item is going to be correct. Why? Because it burns your offensive component. The rod that you had is less valuable because your main carry is already itemized with 3 items. Like your Malzahar does not need any more rods, unless he's kind of into that stuff. But making a crown guard allows you to balance out your frontline and backline items because it uses the rod and then you still have the cloak to make that 3rd item. Making crown guard allows you to balance out your frontline and backline items much better. But now that we're done with both the item and gold economy, let's talk about the leveling curve and tempo. Leveling and tempo are fundamental concepts to understand in TFT because they dictate the pace of your game. Leveling too early can cause you to have too little gold to roll with, while leveling too late will cost you costly HP. Just like in Breaking Bad, where Walter White lost too much of his health before he realized his full potential. By the way, when we combine leveling and tempo with lobby contextualization, which we'll talk about later in this video, you will make the right decision every single time on when to level. Let's go over questions you should ask yourself whenever you are deciding when to level. How much money will we have left over? Do we have to level and roll on the same turn? What shop odds are we trying to optimize? Can we preserve a win streak if we level? These are the questions you need to ask. So the standard leveling curves in TFT are as follows. If you're on a win streak, you want to be level 4 on stage 2-1, level 5 on 2-5, level 6 on 3-1, level 7 on 3-5, level 8 on 4-2, and level 9 on 5-2. This is if you win every single round. If you're winning, you want to push levels and access higher level units in order to continue your win streak. If you have a lot of pairs on 3-1, you're pretty much allowed to roll a couple of times, and the same rule applies on 3-5. On stage 4-2, you're likely going to roll a little bit more to stabilize and save some HP on the way to level 9, but since you don't want to take 20 damage a fight during stage 4, you for sure need to roll a little bit on level 8. Ideally, you hit a few 4 cost 1 stars, maybe 1 or 2 5 cost units, and then go 9 on 5-2. Sometimes you have to roll a little bit deeper, and in those games, delay your level 9 until stage 5-5. You then want to leverage your HP you gained from this spot from win streaking in the early game, such as winning the first 8 rounds, and try to hit level 9 before other players. But again, sometimes it's not always possible. If you are streaking with an econ augment, I will say that the timing of this does change a little bit if you streaked with an econ augment, which is very rare because, as we discussed before in the augment section, econ augments are typically for lose streaks, but sometimes you hit every unit in your shop without rolling, and you have an econ augment. In those cases, you can even consider going level 9 as early as stage 4-5. Now let's flip the script and talk about lose streaking. So when you lose streak, you typically level up to level 4 on stage 2-3, level 5 on stage 2-7, level 6 on 3-2, level 7 on 3-5, but do try to keep above 40 gold, level 8 on 4-1, and level 9 on 5-5. So if you are lose streaking, you absolutely need to win most rounds in stage 4. So that's why you typically level up to level 8 on stage 4-1, even though the leveling interval is suboptimal because you have 2 excess experience. But because you lost streaked earlier, you have to do your absolute best not to lose a single fight in this stage. If not, you're pretty much out of luck. Because usually when you lose streak, you're playing at around around a 50 or 60 HP deficit, so every loss starting from stage 4 has highly increased effects compared to everyone else. If you had a very good econ augment, you should structure your curve around leveling to level 9 on 4-5. One special note though, if you did have an especially good econ augment, you should try to curve your leveling to get to level 9 on stage 4-5, because in set 15, 5 costs are actually really strong right now, at least in the first patch. And these comps can lead you to a lot of first place finishes. So just to sum up, the two options if you're on a full lose streak in the early game is to stabilize at level 8 on stage 4-1 and try to win every round in stage 4. If you had super econ, go to level 9 on stage 4-5 and roll for 5 costs. We'll talk about fast 9ing in a future video, so definitely subscribe to stay up to date on that, or be a regular visitor of bunnymuffins.lol, as a guide might be posted there a little bit earlier. So the two scenarios of win streak and lose streaking, we've talked about those extensively if you've been a long-time viewer, and that's the easy part of the game. But what happens when you're in a mixed streak, which happens more often than not? Unfortunately, mixed streaks are the hardest games to play because there will be a lot of nuance in min-maxing small amounts of gold from 2-game win and loss streaks. But essentially the worst scenario that can happen in stage 2 is lose, win, lose, win, lose. But sometimes it's unavoidable. The hardest decision points will be leveling to 4 or 5 on stage 2. You'll need to be extremely efficient with your money, as you do not have the extra income from streaking. So if you are on a mixed streak, most of the time you're going to be playing for a vertical trait or some sort of budget comp. The reason why vertical trait comps are a bit cheaper to play is because it's in the name, they're vertical. So you play all the units in one trait, which means you're playing a bunch of 1 and 2 cost units. Compare this to maybe like a flex board, which may be running 3 costs and above. This way, if you're a bit of a cheapo when you get to level 8 by doing a vertical comp, it does allow you to eventually make it to level 9. Vertical boards also tend to do pretty decently in stage 4 because most players do not have 2-star legendaries yet to kind of outscale you, so it allows you to play for top 4 with a small HP lead. If you manage to high roll while playing a vertical comp and get the 1-star 5 cost that you're looking for, that could also just solidify your game and just put you in the top 3. HP preservation is extremely important whenever you are playing a mixed streak, as it is the only resource you have over the lost streak players. Obviously, if I were to pick every single game what I'd have, I'd choose to be on a win streak permanently, right? But that doesn't always happen, so a lose streak is pretty easy to force because you don't have to play that many units, but with less life comes more responsibility. Meanwhile, if you do a win-lose, yeah, you'll have less gold, but at least you'll have 20 or 30 HP over the lose streak guy. At the start of stage 4, we always see someone at around 90 or above HP, we see a few people at around 70, and then we see a few people at around 40 or 50. These streak players, though, are likely to outcap you, but you should have more lives than they do, so if they end up facing the super high roller that game more often than you are going to be able to scrape past the lose streak players. Unfortunately, with a normal or mixed streak, you pretty much live or die by your 4-2 roll down, and if you miss, sometimes that's just part of the game. However, hitting reasonable upgrades during your 4-2 roll down definitely will save you a bunch of life, even though it's a bit harder to. Now that we've covered the 3 types of streaks you'll encounter, let's talk about reroll. Let's start with 1-cost reroll. So when you play 1-cost reroll, do not press the level button at all until you 3-star your desired 1-cost unit. We'll cover this more in the leveling guide in the future, but lower leveling odds on stage 3-1 are very important, but if you ever press the level up button during stage 2, just do not do 1-cost reroll anymore, because when you do, you reach level 5 by the time you reach stage 3-1. So you always want to be level 4 on stage 3-1 when you're doing 1-cost reroll, because it is the time where you roll the most. It's the last round before you're level 5, and level 4 odds are much better than level 5 odds for 1-cost units. So depending on your econ, most players like rolling to at least 32 gold, but sometimes you can choose to roll a little bit past this point if you're really close to getting an upgrade, and that way you stabilize your entire stage 3. Afterwards though, in most other cases though, you're gonna econ back up to 50 gold and slow roll from there, or dig deep and slow roll from there. Slow rolling is essentially just rolling until you have 50 gold every single turn, and this is performed just so you can maintain the maximum amount of interest every single turn. For me personally, in addition to rolling on stage 3-1, sometimes I roll on stage 3-5 because winning 3-5 and 3-6 is likely to give you an extra life. And 1-cost rerolls do not cap as high as 4 and 5 cost boards, so most of the time, if you do a 1-cost reroll and you're really close, sometimes you roll a bit earlier. This small little spike can often end up giving you a +1 placement because you do have one more life. 1 cost reroll though is inherently more aggressive than 2 and 3 costs, as it is cheaper to hold units and you do not have to invest in leveling until you hit your desired units. Speaking of 2 costs, let's go into that right now. For 2 cost reroll, you could either follow the lose streak pattern and then once you hit level 6 you'd start slow rolling, or you could follow this more aggressive pattern if you do end up winning some rounds, because sometimes you are strong early. So what you can do is level up to 4 on stage 2-1 if you have a copy of the unit you're rerolling plus a slammable item. You could go to 5 on 2-5 to keep up the win streak, or if you are just strong in general. If not, make sure you have at least 20 gold. On level 6, you could do that on 3-2 and you can roll to stabilize, and then after that you just slow roll. You'll typically reach level 7 by 4-5 and level 8 by 5-2, assuming you have average luck. For 3 cost reroll, again, you can either lose streak or go to level 4 on 2-1 if you're strong and have a copy of the unit you're rerolling plus a slammable item, level 5 on 2-5, the same as the 2 cost reroll, level 6 on 3-2, and then for level 7, it's going to happen on 3-5 or 4-1. Make sure though, when you do reach level 7, that you roll and hit your carry to 2-star to stabilize, because this little spike is essentially the times where you are strong. After that, you're very weak until you hit the 3-star 3 cost, and that could take some time. Sometimes you hit it in the middle of stage 4, but then sometimes you hit it in the middle of stage 5. So it really just depends on how many copies of the unit that you have. But now that we have leveling out of the way, let's talk about scouting. Scouting is a bit of a nuanced topic because it varies significantly from game to game. For the most part though, there are 3 types of scouting. You scout for better positioning, you scout for line selection, or you scout to see the strength of your opponents. So positioning we're going to cover right after this. Line selection, we already went over that, where you want to scout to see what other people are going, what augments they picked before you decide what you want to play. And then lastly, for strength of opponents, that deals with econ decisions and leveling management, because you need to decide whether you can lose streak or win streak. So even though we covered line selection earlier in this guide, something we didn't look into is the concept of the open line. Most of the time, people's item slams on stage 2 and 3 will tell you exactly what they are playing. Obviously, if you look around and people have a wandering trainer with very specific traits, or they take maybe an executioner augment, you know what they're going. But what about items? This takes a bit of extra knowledge, but as you practice over and over, you'll soon realize what items lead to which units. Obviously, sometimes your opponents are a bit of a doozy because you didn't share this video with them, but most of the time, when someone makes a Rage Blade and a Kraken, they're likely going to play something like Ashe. But for the people who do not use bunnymuffins.lol/meta, they might play a Kali with these items for some reason. Those cases are rare, but I promise you it happens less and less as you get higher and higher in the ranking system. But for the most part, if someone goes Rageblade and Kraken, they're probably going to play Ashe, which means at a minimum, 3 Ashes are likely to be taken out of the unit pool. So what are you supposed to do in that situation? Well, you don't have to play Ashe, right? Unless Ashe is the best comp of that patch, probably just leave that guy alone. What you can do instead is try maybe an uncontested line. So when you select an uncontested line, you're more likely to hit your desired units because no one else is going to hold them. Obviously, you can't do this every game, and also you still can get unlucky, but because you can't pick your items, what you can do instead is try to look for an open line. Figuring out what people are playing allows us to avoid spots where we get contested by 2 or more people. Getting contested by 2 or more people is literally a death sentence in TFT, as you could be stuck on 1-star carries into as late as stage 5. But for the single people out there, this might be the only times you hold hands with other people. So maybe it's not so bad. But on the flip side, getting contested on a reroll comp is also a death sentence a lot of the time because there are only so many units in the unit pool. So if you go to the bottom of the leveling page of bunnymuffins.lol, you'll know that 3 cost units, they only have 18 copies in the pool. That means that 2 players hitting 3-star 3 cost is pretty much the same as getting like a 3-star legendary. It's that hard to do because you have to take every unit out of the pool. That's assuming that no one else in the game is picking up that unit. But if you play the open line, it definitely does help to avoid these death sentences. Now let's talk about strength of the lobby. Knowing what other people are playing is incredibly important as it allows you to understand when they spike. Which brings us to our next topic, which is the strength of the lobby. 1 cost rerolls tend to spike at 3-1, 3-5, and 4-1. 2 cost rerolls at 3-2, 4-1, and 4-5. 3 cost rerolls at 3-2, 3-5, 4-1, and 5-1. Fast 8 spikes at 4-2, and Fast 9 spikes on 4-2 or 4-5. Obviously, a lot of these stages, it's going to depend on how much econ each player has, but those are generally the breakpoints. Knowing this information is incredibly valuable because if the reroll players are in your potential pool of opponents, and you can find out more about this if you watch our 50 tips video, just click on my channel and you'll find it very easily. But if you know, you would not want to expend resources to preserve a streak because they'll likely be stronger than you, especially at those early stages in stage 3. So let's say you're on an 8-game win streak on stage 3-5 with 50 gold. It costs 28 gold to level up to level 7, and your pool is a 1-cost reroller, a 2-cost reroller, and a Crystal Gambit player. If we take all this information into account, we should not level to level 7 and instead make maximum interest, as you're more than likely to lose to those reroll players, but then beat the Crystal Gambit player. You're gonna beat the Crystal Gambit player regardless of whether you level up or not, so you don't really gain that much from leveling. A lot of players tend to force a level and be the strongest they can because it's out of habit or because they read it in a leveling guide, but you always have to pay attention to what's going on in your actual game. In this specific scenario, you're going to lose 66% of the time unless you go to level 7 and roll as well, which can be very costly and will break your level 8 and level 9 timings. So knowing who is in your pool and when they are likely to spike is incredibly important to making the most out of your streaks. Now let's talk about positioning. Positioning is something that also varies greatly from game to game and can get incredibly complex. However, there are a few concepts that can help us simplify it, and that is knowing about focus firing, aggro polling, and unit trapping. Focus firing is the idea of positioning your units in such a way that they target or focus the same unit. This is incredibly important on stage 2, as the overall damage is going to be lower. However, this concept is applicable to every stage of the game, and it is important to be aware of what your units are targeting so that they kill enemy units in the fastest and most efficient manner. So if we look at these two boards, who do you think will win the fight? Even though they're running the same exact units and the same exact items, well, no items, the bottom player will pretty much always win because their units are dealing damage in the most efficient way. The top player's Gnar will aggro onto Aatrox, while Sivir will aggro onto Zac. This means damage is being split instead of focused. For the bottom player, Gnar and Sivir will both go and aggro onto Zac, killing it faster than the top players. This means that the bottom players Aatrox and Zac will have more uptime and deal more damage than the top players. What about aggro polling? The idea of pulling aggro is that you force a unit in a certain path by making them aggro and target one of your units. If someone's playing Viego and positions them on the 3rd row, your Ashe will attack the Udyr first. While Ashe is autoing Udyr, Viego will walk up to the highlighted hex, meaning that he'll be targeted by Ashe next, making him die very early on in the fight, assuming Udyr is easily taken care of. Pulling a melee carry's aggro and making your range carry focus them is a key to winning many melee carry matchups. Next, I want to talk about unit trapping, which is especially important when you're trying to secure a loss streak. It's very simple, but it's a great trick to know. So let's say you're playing Crystal Gambit and you need to ensure that you're going to lose the next round just so you don't ruin your double down. What you can do is position your units like this in a triangle in the bottom right, and this makes it so that Vi cannot interact with enemy units until after either Syndra or Janna die or walk up. This allows you to play weakest board so that you keep your loss streak as long as possible. Now we have a little special section which talks about lobby context. Lobby contextualization is one of the more advanced topics to cover in TFT, and it requires a lot of reps and constant attempts at understanding enemy board strengths to get it right. It requires knowledge of every comp and understanding when and why the spike occurs on the turns that they do. So you know how sometimes you play one comp, you only play one comp, and you kind of AFK it? It's a great way to play and it's a great way to climb, but if you're looking to become the best player or get to a more advanced rank, sometimes you need to break away from that to learn what other people are thinking, because if you put yourselves in someone else's shoes, you know what they're thinking, and then you can play around it based on whatever your favorite comp is. But let's start off with a simple example first. If an opponent took an augment called Calculated Loss, which is essentially just a lose streak augment and benefits a player if they lose a lot, and has a Crystal Gambit cash out, and is also on a 10 loss streak. They're now at 30 life on stage 4-1. What can we expect this player to do going forward? Well, they're probably going to try to get an extremely strong board with excess economy, which will allow them to go level 9. This means that this opponent will very likely not be beatable on stage 4, much less in stage 5. What can you do with this information? Well, assume that they're likely going to top 2. Why is this important? Because we know that we are likely to lose a placement to them no matter what we do unless we have a spot that can test for first. This means that it's extremely important to be stronger than other players in the lobby with weaker boards and cap potential. Losing to the weaker opponents solidifies a bot 4 because they are the players we are fighting for that top 4 placement. This means that scouting your pool and rolling aggressively if they are in your pool of opponents is extremely important, and you might need to break leveling patterns to achieve this. Every life you preserve by beating out lower capping or weaker opponents is another hit you're allowed to take from the guy playing to win out. If you're playing for first, on the other hand, you can use this type of logic to find out who your final opponent is likely to be, and then try to grief their units or spike on rounds that they're in your pool. It's very important to understand the cap potential of your board. Cap meaning the maximum strength that your board can possibly be. So if you're waiting for 3 costs, if you're waiting for full items on someone, imagine you have that. That's the cap of your board. But when you play a reroll line, you're kind of stuck at lower levels a lot of times because you spent a lot of your gold rolling rather than leveling. So if we compare that to a fast 9 player, if we're on stage 5, specifically stage 5-2, the level 9 player is going to be all inning that turn and going to be likely much stronger than you. A lot of people elect to greed their gold from stage 4-5 to 5-1 when they do a fast 9, and then they have the spike sometime in the early part of stage 5. This means if you are playing a reroll comp, you should aim to dominate them during that time, but know that you are going to lose a bit later. So say you're playing reroll and your matchmaking pool on 4-5 or 4-6 is 2 players who are attempting to fast 9 and spike on 5-2. If you lose to either of these players, you're giving them a lot more time and health to hit their desired 5 cost because they might not feel pressured to roll a bit earlier. Then, since you gave them an extra turn, they're going to hit their comp and be unbeatable. So if you think of your board as not strong enough to win against these players, you should roll a bit more aggressively on stage 4-5 or 4-6. A direct example would be if you're playing the crew and you are level 7 with 7 zigs and 30 gold on stage 4-5. Your pool is just 2 people attempting to fast 9 and someone stuck at level 8 with multiple 4 cost 2 stars. And a third player is someone who did a fast 8 with multiple 4 costs and 2 stars. We should be setting it to 0 here if we think Ziggs 3 makes a difference in winning either of the fast 9 matchups. Even if we end up fighting the level 8 player who is still strong, you'll save HP, but most of the time you get to punish the greedy players, which both hastens their clock and lowers their power spike, and you get yourself another life. So even though this win on the surface only saves 10 to 15 HP, it almost always translates into getting an additional +1 placement. When you think about lobbied context, you need to think more about, oh, how strong am I, how strong is everyone else? You have to think of direct matchups and the timing of the stages. So that way you can deny a life from a fast 9 player or other players in different power spike levels, and then you turn their game into a bot 4 and secure a +1 placement for yourself. With enough practice, meta knowledge, and board strength analysis, you should be able to assign a likely placement to most of your opponents. This lets us make decisions that are logical from our own spot to maximize your own placement. So now that we've covered all the fundamentals of TFT, how do we tie them all together? Well, first, you need to learn what lines to go for early. This is the most important. The best lines combine your opener, items, and augments all together. While all these things being in harmony doesn't happen all the time, you need to at least try to factor everything into account. After that, you need to combine it with a proper econ strategy through streaking, but also know what to do when you can't streak. Next is spiking, where you need to know when you are strong and when your opponents are strong and play around it accordingly by scouting and looking at your matchups and knowing when to break the rules by rolling off interval. Lastly, put yourselves in your opponent's shoes. What would you do in their situation and how can you adapt your board to react accordingly? By tying all these concepts together, your TFT games will essentially play themselves after watching this video. It's up to you whether you want to share this with your friend, but if you are looking out for them and want them to improve as much as you did, definitely give them the link because you won't have to do much in your games anymore. However, the only way to actually get good at everything you just learned is through practice and experience. It's not a memorization test. While spamming games isn't the most effective way to climb, it is useful to do after you learn a new way to approach playing, such as after watching this entire video. Also, don't forget that there are 2 types of knowledge. No, I'm not talking about street smarts and book smarts. Instead, I'm talking about TFT fundamentals and patch knowledge. So you covered all your fundamental knowledge over here, but you still need the missing patch knowledge, which can be gained through looking at tier lists or looking at data sites. So bunnymuffins.lol/meta for that and teamfight.lol for data. But thanks for watching. Hopefully you all enjoyed this and I'll see you all next time.